Hey folks, so I have a very interesting troubleshoot your houseplant video for you all. And it was getting super cold outside, so I brought in my calamondin orange tree for the winter, and I started to notice this chlorosis happening on the leaves as well as some leaf drop. So I thought it would be a really instructive video to observe the plant, troubleshoot what may actually be happening, and then attempt to rectify the situation. Now, I probably should have not let my calamondin wait so long to troubleshoot, but I really wanted to film this one and didn't get around to it, so here we are. It looks a little worse for wear, but I think we're gonna be still okay. So just a reminder, we have a Troubleshoot Your Houseplants mini course, which is also available in the Houseplant Masterclass online, and that takes you through different scenarios of what may be happening to your plants. And it's really easy for us to maybe turn to places immediately to diagnose what's wrong, but it's also really empowering to try to figure it out yourself through observation and trial and error. Now, I will say your guesses may very well be wrong, especially because plants, like humans, will exhibit similar symptoms, and there could be different reasons for that ailment. So in humans, for example, you may have a stuffy nose. So, that could be because you have the common cold or the flu or seasonal allergies, or you could be allergic to cats or a number of other things. That's the same with plants. Plants can have yellow leaves, but it may be due to a nutritional deficiency or an insect infestation, or the leaves may be senescing for the season, for instance. So there's all sorts of different reasons which may yield similar symptoms. Now, what's interesting with this plant is that it clearly has chlorosis, which means the yellowing of leaves, but it has a very specific kind of chlorosis, which is called interveinal chlorosis, which means between the veins, it is yellow and the veins still remain green. Now, one thing you could take note of is where is it happening on the plant? Is it in the older leaves? Is it on the younger leaves? Or is it all over the plant? Another thing you'll notice is that there are plenty of green leaves, specifically here. But look where they are actually emanating from, down towards the bottom of this tree. And these leaves are mighty vigorous, and they have all these sharp spines on them, unlike the rest of the plant. Now, if you recall, I potted this up maybe 4 or 5 months ago now, and I know that this tree has been grafted. Now, a grafted tree simply means that the rootstock, so that's the bottom part or the bottom portion of the plant, it is a different variety than the upper portion of the plant. And that upper portion of the plant is also known as the scion. And horticulturalists will do this for a number of different reasons. They may want to preserve a specific quality or cultivar of the tree, or they may want like a stronger rootstock that is maybe less susceptible to a specific kind of disease, or one that works better in a specific soil type or climate type. So for instance, if you have a clay soil, maybe a specific rootstock is better in clay soil versus sandy soil. So there can be many different reasons. Now, some rootstocks have a tendency to push out more sprouts, and those sprouts can be really vigorous and then eclipse the scion, which I think is what's happening here. And remember again, the scion is the upper part of the tree. And I actually had this happening outdoors on a special cultivar of purple blooming black locust. And I noticed the lower branch below the graft was growing like really fast. And that lower branch also had a bunch of thorns. So I cut that branch off, and then the scion began to thrive and it flowered this year. So that whole process of where the sprouts on the graft is overtaking the scion is called reversion. And that means the tree will eventually revert back to the original rootstock if it's not dealt with. So in sum, that is actually what I'm observing here. And I think that there could be a few things that may be happening with this plant, or at least these would be like my educated guesses. Yes, we definitely have a nutrient deficiency because we see the interveinal chlorosis. But is that happening because of lack of fertilizer? I mean, perhaps. I probably could have fertilized it a little bit more during the season. Or there could potentially be a lack of fertilizer because the rootstock, which is obviously healthier and has greener leaves and is more robust, is potentially gobbling up the macro and micronutrients and not shuttling enough of those nutrients up to the scion's leaves. This could also be a possibility because, again, we're not seeing interveinal chlorosis on these rootstock leaves. Now, before we go down that road any further, let's look as to where the interveinal chlorosis is happening on this upper portion of the plant. We see it both on new leaves as well as the old leaves. And I see it a little bit stronger on the old leaves first, as opposed to just the new leaves. But I'm starting to see it on the new leaves as well. And typically when you see interveinal chlorosis on younger or newer leaves, it would point to more of an iron deficiency. And an iron deficiency can also mean that the pH is actually too high in the potting medium, which also means it's too alkaline, or the potting medium or the soil. In this case, it's the potting medium because I have it in a pot right here. And the iron could also be getting locked up because the soil is too alkaline, and then it can't move to the roots of the plant and therefore can't get up to the newer leaves of the plant. Iron deficiency can also happen if there is an excess of other nutrients like magnesium, for instance, and also a deficiency in manganese can also be the culprit too. And if, again, like I said, if soil is too alkaline, that manganese will get locked up. So we want to also make sure that the pH of the soil is appropriate for this plant as well. Now, in contrast, if we see interveinal chlorosis in the older leaves of the plant, it may mean that there is a magnesium deficiency. And this typically happens if the pH is low. So if the pH is below 6.0, then it gets a bit locked up. And it's actually the opposite of iron, because if the pH is like 6.0, iron gets taken up strongly. So if the soil is actually too acidic, citrus will more or less want a pH range between 6.0 and 7.0. So that's kind of the target that you'd want to hit. But my hunch is that these sprouts, considering that they look so healthy and so vigorous, I think that they are taking up some of those macro and micronutrients and stealing them from the scion. And overall, the scion is not getting those nutrients because of that. So if I leave the sprouts on and then fertilize the plant, it'll probably just be feeding these sprouts and helping them become like monstrous. So first things first, I'm going to remove these sprouts, and I'm going to do that by taking a sharp pair of clippers. So I have my clippers right here, and I'm going to just spray them and sanitize them. Now what you want to do is cut as close to the trunk as possible. All right, I'm gonna leave one of these on so I could do a close-up after. Maybe I'll leave that one on. Some of these are really, really vigorous. And you don't want to damage the trunk. It's pretty amazing. You could see how thorny these are. Now, I would be happy enough to probably give this another fertilize, even though it's approaching winter, but let's first see where the pH of the soil is at. Now, this is a step that I normally wouldn't do, but I think it's helpful to do with all of you, because you never know. Maybe I'll be shocked with what I find out, But like I said, ideally the pH would be somewhere between a 6.0 and a 7.0. And citrus kind of likes to fall in that area. A little bit maybe more acidic than alkaline, because as I mentioned, if it gets too alkaline, a lot of those nutrients will get locked up. So I have two contraptions for testing the pH. The first is a pH meter. Honestly, I don't love these because I don't find them to be so precise, and I'm not even certain how accurate they may be in a potting medium versus soil. But I thought I would test my potting mix with the meter and then back up that test with pH strips as well. One thing I will say is that the meter needs to have a wet medium to work, so make sure your plant is thoroughly watered. Now when I place it in, it appears as if the potting medium is close to neutral. Next, we'll test the pH with pH test strips. Now I personally like this brand, which I'll leave the link in the description below. It's calibrated for soil and has 3 color pads that give you a higher accuracy of pH. So dig into your potting medium, careful not to hit any roots, and roughly get about 8 tablespoons of potting mix into a clean cup, and then use about 8 tablespoons of distilled water and mix. Now it's important to use distilled water because you may have impurities in your regular tap water, which can affect the results. Now for the best solution, you'll want to wait at least a half an hour, but you could even wait longer than that. So just stir up the mixture before testing, stick the pH strip in, knock any soil mixture that's stuck to the pads, and then wait 60 seconds to check the color on the jar. I mean, this looks pretty neutral to me. Maybe somewhere between 6.5 to 7, maybe a bit sweeter than that, but I would say it's hovering around neutral. So between these 2 pH readings, we can safely say that I don't think any nutrients are getting locked up because of soil pH. So now that I've cut all these sprouts off here, what I'm going to do is actually give it a little fertilizer. And I'm going to use the Spoma Organic Citrus Tone because it not only has NP and K, but it has magnesium. I believe it has sulfur as well. It has calcium, so it has lots of great different kinds of nutrients. And again, typically I wouldn't be fertilizing at this point in time, but because the nutrients are probably getting taken up, I'm guessing, by those rootstock sprouts, I'm going to get more of this fertilizer in here. And this is a organic fertilizer. So it has a little bit of a pungent smell, I should say. So keep that in mind if you're keeping this in your house. But what I want to do is actually just water it thoroughly and see if the fertilizer will actually help. And because it's an organic fertilizer, it's not a synthetic fertilizer, it's going to fertilize over time. So it's a little bit more gentle than having, say, a synthetic fertilizer. Now, if you do use a synthetic fertilizer, then be sure to actually cut it probably at least by half, particularly during the cooler season, because it's a non-growing season. And again, I'm watering it fairly thoroughly. I do want to see maybe water come down into the lower basin below, and just to know that these roots are not drying out. Again though, one of the things that you have to be very careful of is if you are going to create root rot, because you're not having as much airflow indoors as you would outdoors. So keep that in mind. Usually inside the house, it's a bit more hot, and sometimes you have humidity, but maybe not in the winter months. But the heat is always going to be on. It's going to dry out the plant quite a bit, but you're not going to have the airflow that you would if you have outdoors. So I would say that you might have to still water it, but not water it maybe as generously as if it was outside. And again, I had it in a closed area, so it wasn't always getting that rainwater. It was underneath the patio area, so that's another thing to consider. If you're in an area that is relatively rainy and you have a citrus plant, you may want to regulate the water some more, or you may not need to water it as much because it's actually getting rainwater. So these are things that you have to, really observe in your own neck of the woods. What is happening here may be completely different than what you may be experiencing in another situation. So a secondary issue that we're seeing is that there is a significant amount of leaf drop, and I'm assuming that this could be because of maybe two major issues. The first being that I didn't gradually take the plant in from outside to the inside, and the threat of frost came, and it came rather quickly, and I'm not always here all the time, and so I immediately brought the plant in. And typically you'd want to gradually bring your plant in. So if you have like a closed patio, for instance, even if it's unheated, but it's protected from wind and other elements, that would be great. Or even better would be a solarium or a greenhouse. That would totally be better. So if you have a lack of that, then the next best thing is near a southern window. However, my olive tree in the back there has the southern window spot here. But luckily, we have a spot in a southern window in a building that is partially undergoing renovation now. What I'll end up doing is probably shuttling that up there to overwinter until it's nice enough to be released in the spring outdoors. And just so you know, it's not unusual to see leaf drop when you change the environment relatively quickly, which is why ideally you do it less drastically than I did. And the leaf drop here, like if I touch the plant, some of the leaves will actually start dropping. None of them are dropping right now, but I could actually get some of these off right here, which are not going to come back at this stage of the game. But the leaf drop here is probably more than I would like, but if that's the case, just be mindful how you're actually watering your plant. If there is dramatic leaf drop and the leaf loss is, you pretty much have a stem, let's say, your natural instinct may be, oh boy, maybe I should water the hell out of this plant, and that would be kind of the wrong course, because if you're watering the plant and it doesn't have that amount of leafage, it's not going to need as much water, and then the plant could suffer maybe root or collar rot, for example. Now, I personally got really excited to have citrus because I could put it out in the patio in the summer months, but if I could give myself maybe some feedback, it would be think through where you're going to put these large plants in the winter months, particularly when you may be short on space due to renovations or a small house. So that's one thing to keep as a reminder before you get plants, especially if ones that you're going to have outdoors part-time and then bring in again. Make sure you have a place for them. So anyway, I hope this has helped you think through troubleshooting a plant, specifically this calamondin orange tree, and I'll see you in another episode here on Plant One On Me.
Thanks for tuning into Plant One On Me. You can learn more about our online houseplant courses over at homesteadbrooklyn.com. And if you'd like to see more of our outdoor garden tours and renovations, check out what we're doing on our sister channel over at Flock Finger Lakes. We'll see you in the next episode.